was made possible by the generosity of those.
Man is composed of body and soul. Just as he has a body, he has certainly bodily needs, such as the need for food and drink. But he also has spirit, and he has spiritual needs, the chief of which being God, who is infinite beauty. But man can't possess God in this life, but he can reflect upon the beauty of God through created things. Moreover, God established a relationship between certain sounds and colors which enables man to create works of art, works to refresh his spirit and to moreover will reflect the beauty of God. Consider, for instance, the preambulum to the Bach Partita in G major, a very joyous work, reflecting perhaps the joy of heaven itself. But the arts can be abused, and music can appeal to that which is base and low in man's nature. Consider the following.
Man, whatever happened to real music?
Man, I'm talking the good old days.
Yeah.
AC/DC, Highway to Hell.
Yeah,
I'm on a highway to hell.
Hey, don't stop, man!
That's what I'm talking about.
Missing those great heavy metal songs that set the world's feet a-stomping? Cool Out Concession Records has just put together 30 of the top metal hits of the me generation into one double record set. Notes from the underground. Bang your head to the sizzling sounds of Alice Cooper. Go to Hell. Kiss Hotter Than Hell. Cramps. Aloha from Hell. Grim Reaper. See You in Hell. CJSS. Citizen of Hell. Rigor Mortis. Condemned to Hell. AC/DC. Highway to Hell. Twisted Sister. Burn in Hell. Cheap Trick. Gonna Raise Hell. Merciful Fate. Princess of Hell. Raven. Hell Patrol. What is wrong with this man? Is this just a good time, or is there something of a deeper significance going on here as well? What type of effects does this music have upon people? Is it only rock and roll?
This is What Catholics Believe. I'm Julius Smetona. Today, to discuss with me rock, rap, and drugs are three priests who say the traditional Latin Mass exclusively. Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Parma, Ohio, and principal of St. Gertrude Academy in Cincinnati, Ohio. Father Donald Sanborn, pastor of St. Pius X Church in Warren, Michigan, and Father Clarence Kelly, spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate, a group of Roman Catholic traditional nuns in Round Top, New York. Reverend Fathers, has the Catholic Church ever established guidelines on art and entertainment, i.e., good and bad art, morally speaking? Also, can art and entertainment lead to sinful and immoral behavior?
Catholic Church has been very vocal about the entertainment that Catholics watch and the human race in general. Pius XII issued a whole encyclical concerning it, motion pictures, and regulated very carefully the morality of what appeared on motion pictures, not only with regard to what was shown, but also with regard to what was approved of in the plot line. For example, anything to do with the approbation of divorce or any kind of human immorality was excluded from the consumption by Catholics. And then there was the Legion of Decency years ago that was very strict with regard to what they would permit. Almost any movie today would never have passed the Legion of Decency. I remember movies years ago that were that now would be considered tame, which were considered B pictures by the Legion of Decency, and that is morally objectionable in part for all. But apart from that, the Church has always defended truth and goodness in art. The Church loves to see art in its own home. For centuries, the greatest achievements of art have always been in church. And that is true of almost any civilization. If you look at the Roman civilization or the Greeks, Muslims, other pagan civilizations, the great achievements of human beings have always been in their churches, in their religious art. It is only again in the past few hundred years that art has gotten away from the reflection of divine beauty and has turned toward the human. And while the human is not in itself bad, we must always remember that there is a tendency in human beings to evil because of original sin.
Father Jenkins, can rock music, say, or any music, influence behavior?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It can and does influence behavior. Rock music is considered a form of entertainment. But of course, if anything is entertaining, it has to have some kind of effect which people like. That is what makes it entertaining. And someone cannot say that rock music or any form of entertainment has no effect on a human being. The question is what effect it might have. And the fact is that rock music is not really music. It is actually sound effects, is what it is. Rock music is actually a corruption of the very idea of music, because all music is a composition of melody, harmony, timbre, and rhythm. And those are arranged in a certain kind of hierarchy, the melody being the most perfect, the most intellectual of all, and rhythm being the most physical, the most carnal. And that is why in primitive religious rites, a furious beat, very heavy rhythm, it always takes a center role because it has a kind of hypnotic effect on the mind that is often used in connection with sexual promiscuity and drug abuse. This is like the unholy trinity of religions that worship the devil under one form or another. If you look at rock music takes melody and basically relegates it to the last place, if melody has any place at all in rock music. In place of harmony, it gives us dissonance. In place of timbre, which is the natural sound of a musical instrument, it gives us distortion. And that's why the distortion pedal on a rock guitar is very heavily used during rock music. And rhythm takes precedence, though. Rhythm is like the major element of rock music. And even as far as the vocalization, I'm just talking about the sound itself. I'm not even talking about the words that are said during rock songs, but the words add to the distortion in the music often a very evil message. And they consist of shouting or screaming or moaning or groaning. a message that is repeated over and over and over again. And this definitely has a hypnotic effect on the mind. And it is a very evil effect. Very often it produces a wildness, a savagery, a viciousness. It's not readily apparent in everybody, but in the course of time, it definitely has a degrading effect upon a person's way of thinking.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned rhythm. I would even go one step further. I would say that rock, and in most of rock, you don't have rhythm, you have pounding. Mm-hmm. I think there's a distinction between rhythm, which orders music with respect to time, as opposed to going... And this is so prominent that, you know, I think anyone will agree that if they just perform this experiment on themselves, they will tend to start accompanying with their body the downbeat, and when it's so loud and so prominent, you can feel rock music from a great distance and you can't hear anything. So it evokes a certain automatic, almost involuntary response.
It is really overpowering, there's no question. They've done tests, acoustical tests at rock concerts, and they've discovered that the sound levels so many feet away from the speakers are the equivalent of standing on a ramp when jets are taking off behind jet engines, and what levels will cause permanent ear damage. The trouble is, though, people like rock music. They do, and you can't convince them they don't, because they know they do. They like rock music. They like the effect it has on them. The problem is they should stop and consider what kind of effect it is. It doesn't often bring the best out of it.
Father Kelly, let me ask you this. The rock music scene is unbelievably pervasive. In fact, I believe recent study indicated that teenagers between 7th and 12th grades will spend much more time listening to rock than they will doing homework or studying or spending time in class. Moreover, it's getting so widespread that even Muzak and other such systems are now offering rock music.
You can't go into a restroom without hearing rock music.
That's right.
You can't get away from it.
How would you, could you apply any of the church's moral teaching, I know it's hard to generalize, but to much of this form of entertainment?
Yes, I think that, as St. Paul says, there is in man the law of the flesh and the law of the spirit. The original order that existed when God created Adam and Eve, whereby the intellect ruled, and that was subject to God, has been broken down as a result of original sin, and as a result of the effects of original sin, there is a tendency to evil, there is a tendency to live according to the law of the flesh rather than the law of the spirit. And I think what this music does is, the music panders to the lowest in man. It has the ability to reach into the heart of a man, as it were, and into the mind of a man, and to communicate certain values and certain ideas, and a certain sanction, in the case of much of this music, a certain sanction for immoral behavior. So I do think there is definitely a connection between morality and this music, and moreover, I believe, as Aristotle said, that music is the highest form of art, and it can be used for the best or for the worst.
You're watching What Catholics Believe. We're discussing rock, rap, and drugs. I'd like, Reverend Fathers, it's interesting that rock and roll has progressed, or should I say regressed. From the 50s, its subject matter of its lyrics were typically a certain amount of immorality, perhaps, or innocent or not so innocent love. And in the 60s, it became more and more coarse in regards to purity. In fact, the term itself was coined by Alan Freed, I believe, of Cleveland in the 50s, which was a ghetto term for, for certain immoral behavior. However, in the 70s, we increasingly saw more preoccupation with the occult, the twisted, the bizarre, and even now the satanic. For instance, consider this excerpt from an album by Coven.
Tom LaVey himself would have been proud to have penned the lyrics of Burn the Cross.
Those who pray to God.
What is your reaction to this increasing preoccupation with the satanic? You know, before they would put subliminal messages or backwards messages. Now they hit you right in the face with it. Father Jenkins.
Julius, I've noticed in people who are devoted to rock music that it is for them a religion. I notice that in teenagers with whom I speak who listen to rock music a lot. You could criticize their faith, whatever it might be. If they're Baptist, you could criticize that belief. Presbyterians, Jewish, Buddhist, you can criticize that and they don't react. You can criticize their parents and call their parents jerks, anything you want, but they don't react to that. But if you dare criticize or even hint at criticizing their favorite rock group, it is war, and they hate you. They react with a real bitterness toward you. Why is that? It has just taken them over. And so what we just saw here, I think, is a natural progression, leads to that. There is a certain wildness, a certain viciousness, a certain rebelliousness, a certain sassiness in rock music, which is what I think a lot of people like about it. But ultimately, taken to its final conclusion, it would lead to a worship of the devil, who represents all of these things and is the incarnation of these things in a way.
I think there is also a message in that excerpt that we just played for parents, because there are a lot of parents out there who have abandoned their responsibilities to God and to their children. And they know that their children listen to this evil music. And they try to justify it in their own minds by saying, well, it's just a phase they're going through, or it's a fad, and that they don't really worship and love the devil. And that is an absolute absurdity. It is clear, it is overt, it is formal. This is the worship of the Prince of Darkness. And the parents out there who allow their children to play this music and to be mesmerized by the ideas and by the music itself, those parents are responsible for sending their children to hell. And unless they take control of their own homes and take those records and those cassettes and throw them in the garbage where they belong, they will have a lot to answer for to Almighty God for the destruction of their children.
You know, this brings up another point. There's been a recent controversy over the rap group 2 Live Crew. And I guess this has been going around for a long time, like the publicly obscene and impure behavior of many of the rock, I don't like to use the term artists. I mean, we can go back to Jimi Hendrix performing the most obscene things on stage, smashing his guitar, jumping up and down on it, pouring it with lighter fluid, setting it on fire. Jim Morrison, today, Madonna, Prince. I mean, people are aware of this.
Ozzy Osbourne biting the head off a live bat and then having to get rabies shots. You know, people react, especially kids, I've known, react to rock music the way many adults react to the new religion of Vatican II. They say, well, I don't go in for the hard stuff. You know, I don't take hand communion. I don't, you know, go in for liturgical dance or whatever else, but I still go to the new Mass and go along with it and participate in it and enjoy it. Just like many young people say, well, I don't listen to the hard stuff. I just listen to the you know, basic rock. I don't get into stuff where they're abusing crucifixes or spitting blood or anything like that. But the point is, the same rock stars who put out the songs they're listening to as the less potent stuff are the ones who do the really bad stuff, the real blatant stuff. And whether they're listening to the stuff where it's explicitly satanistic or not, they are paying these people to do this when they buy their rock productions of any genre. If you were to ask one of these teenagers to spit on a crucifix, most of them would refuse. If you were to pay him to spit on the crucifix, still most of them would refuse. But they will go and they will pay someone like Madonna to do it, because that's all right. That's a form of entertainment.
What do you think of this recent decision and the whole case of the obscenity, where the 2 Live Crew were banned and accused of obscene behavior, and then a federal judge, I guess, ruled in their favor? Do you think the government, there should be any kind of regulation of this form of entertainment?
Without question, there should be certain controls, but I think the fact that 2 Live Crew was acquitted and the fact that that man in Cincinnati was let off the hook
Museum.
the art museum showing the photographs of that dead homosexual who died from AIDS. I think that reflects the poison has seeped into the minds of the average person. You would think that the average person who lives in society, who has children, who knows the difficulties, the hardships that they must contend with, would see the objective nature of the situation. But they don't. They don't. They approve it. They sanction it. They in effect, foster it. And I think it does reflect this general corruption that has seeped into the minds of the American people.
Art is always a sign of what is going on in the minds of any people in the history of the world. You can always tell what the elevation or degradation is of their lives and their interests from their art.
What would you tell parents, or anyone for that matter, who says, well, you know, what am I supposed to listen to if I don't listen to AC/DC or Madonna? What kind of a musical formation would, not only you yourselves, but what would the Catholic Church recommend in her teaching, either official teaching or the teachings of the popes or great saints? What would they say? What kind of a musical formation? How important is it?
The Catholic Church never dictates any particular style, or never marries any age of humanity and says this is the best or anything like that. But it always is the friend, even in the natural order, of what is true and good and beautiful. And the Catholic Church holds up as its own pinnacle of music, a Gregorian chant and polyphonic music, and would favor any kind of music that is within the laws of harmony and just good order. And excellent forms of this is the classical music, because classical music obeys all of those things. And that is why there is such a marked difference between, say, what you played at the beginning versus what was played right after it. Those are two different worlds. You would have to, you don't need any education in music, or you could be a person who does not know how to read or write, and just from common sense know that the piece that you played on the piano is beautiful, it's ordered, it's correct, and then the piece that was played with the man gyrating around like he was some kind of an animal in pain or something, that this is something wrong, that there's something wrong there. I mean, you don't need any kind of theorizing about it. It's right there. It's like getting slapped in the face with a wet rag. You know.
Pope Jenkins.
Parents have to train their children to recognize good music, and they have to do it when the children are very small. The children have to grow up from the tenderest years listening to good music. If they're surrounded by this sound effects, as they say, that they're going to grow up with a certain weakness toward it. But if they hear good music, they will have something to compare it to. When I talk to young people about rock music and tell them that they should tune it out, their reaction is, well, then there's no music. There's nothing to listen to. Isn't that incredible? After all of these centuries of magnificent musical pieces, they're totally unfamiliar with them. They have to be introduced to good music when they're little, and then they won't fall for this corruption of music, which is a very poor imitation of music later on.
We're actually very lucky to live in this age when it's so easy to reproduce music, and when we're living after many masters have lived. And somebody living, say, in the 12th century or even the 15th century did not see the Handels and the Bachs and the Mozarts and all of this magnificent literature that came forth. And now we can have it right in our living rooms or in our cars or wherever we want it. Or while we're jogging, we can have it. And you know, this is a magnificent opportunity. It used to be you had to be a nobleman and you had to hire court musicians to hear this, and the little people could never get to it. You know?
It's not only rock music that is bad. Some of the modern so-called classical music they're putting out is also sound effects. Garbage cans clashing together. And as somebody described it to me recently, it's a bunch of instruments bickering with each other. That is also very corrupt, and in some cases more corrupt than rock music itself. It's so anti-intellectual.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think just in general, though, I've seen this seems to be a sign of the times, this preoccupation with rock and pop culture and the growing lack of interest in true art. There's fewer concerts, I believe, real concerts, fewer people are musical amateurs. In the turn of the century, many more people played instruments than they do today.
This century has a preoccupation with the ugly. It does, from Picasso all the way through modern art, modern classical music, modern popular music. There's hardly anything that you can point to except for maybe a few musicals or popular things, The Sound of Music or something like that, that is not ugly. It's just preoccupied with the ugly.
We're out of time. Thank